Join me as we journey back in time to uncover the Elder Scrolls Arena, the underrated trailblazer that laid the foundation for a gaming dynasty spanning over 30 years. Let's dive into the quirks and features of this forgotten gem. The Elder Scrolls Arena is often categorized as an action role-playing game, but I consider it more of a dungeon crawler and a fantasy life simulator. It is the first installment of the famous The Elder Scrolls series, in case you didn't know yet. To be honest, I'm quite familiar with the later titles in the series, but I had never played Arena before the end of 2024. My first experience with The Elder Scrolls was actually with the Daggerfall demo when I was about 14 or 15 years old. I believe it was included on a PC Gamer or the Games Machine CD-ROM. I can't remember which. I dabbled with it, didn't understand much of what was going on, found it boring, and moved on. Now that I am much older, I have developed a higher tolerance and a greater appreciation of these old, janky, maybe funny looking yet important historical games. So, I decided to start to cover the series from the very beginning. As said, Arena is considered an open world action role-playing game by many, but I see it in a slightly different way. For example, you can essentially be whoever you want, disregard the main quest, and explore the various provinces and their wilderness in search of fortune. Pretty much what the majority of us did in Skyrim, I'm quite sure of that. Daggerfall, the second installment of the series, expands wildly on these ideas, but Arena is undoubtedly where everything started. Calling it open world might not be entirely accurate for everyone, since, contrary to what the manual asserts, you can't walk from one settlement to another. You'll be forced to fast travel, and I'll explain why in detail later. Before diving in, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm a bit of a completionist gamer who primarily plays RPGs and other story-based games. I usually experience video games through multiple playthroughs, stopping only when I feel I've seen everything a game has to offer. I believe this attitude gives me some credibility when sharing my thoughts about the game. You might agree or disagree with what I say, of course, but at least you know I have a solid experience on the subject. Naturally, you can't fully complete a game that can generate an infinite amount of content, so what I did was run multiple playthroughs of this game over roughly 100 hours of gameplay. If you're wondering about it, it's difficult to determine how many hours are required to finish a single playthrough of Arena because, in this game more than in many others, it all comes down to your playstyle. The spellcasting classes are much stronger than the others. The various manuals even state this outright, and might lead you to a much faster run focused primarily on the main quest. I'm not very fond of spellcasters though. I'm the kind of player who prefers mundane classes, or those that complement their arsenals with utility spells rather than focusing on them outright. My first playthrough required about 40 hours to complete, and I had to grind quite a bit to accumulate levels, equipment, and money. Others were much shorter, of course, given the fact that at that point I knew the game. If you're thinking about trying this game for the first time, I'd suggest a hybrid class like the Spell Sword. It has decent survivability and access to spells, which will make your life much easier when delving into dungeons. Making a wall disappear in a maze or levitating over a chasm to get straight to your quest objective will probably save your run. It may shock younger players to learn that, in an old game like this, reading the manuals is mandatory. I mean, you could go in blind, but most likely you won't ever finish your run. These manuals explain everything there is to know about the game, and even include a nice narrative introduction, much better than the in-game one. Want to know the best class and race combination for your playstyle? It's all written there. Don't trust internet forums too much. While they often offer quick answers to common questions, most of them are incomplete or outright wrong. Like telling you that a Thief playthrough is fun. It's not, trust me. The free version of Arena comes with 4 manuals: a quick start guide, the manual, a player guide, and the strategy guide Codex Scientia. I'm trying to preserve the Latin pronunciation here, I think it fits. The last one was difficult to find and purchase back in the day. Now it's conveniently available as a nicely formatted PDF file in the docs folder. Don't feel overwhelmed by the hundreds of pages. They mostly consist of tables or even dungeon maps. That's right. It's a full-blown strategy guide with all the maps annotated. Quickly skim through these PDFs, find the information you need, and then begin to truly enjoy the game. There is also a very nice piece written by Vijay Lakshman, I apologize for most likely butchering his name, chief designer, that shows a lot of humility. I can only give him a big thumbs up, 30 years after the game's release. Anyway, let's dive into some details. For an old game like this, I think it's important to share some anecdotes about its development. You'll find sources linked in the video description. The Elder Scrolls Arena was developed and published in March 1994 by Bethesda Softworks, a well-known company today, though quite small back then. I think a brief look at the games they published before 1994 is important, because they clearly paved the way for what Arena would become. Bethesda was known for developing sports games in the late 80s and for securing the Terminator intellectual property in the early 90s, with the publication of The Terminator in 1991, an action-adventure game based on the absolutely iconic 1984 movie. The game was released around the same time that Terminator 2 Judgment Day hit theaters, another incredibly iconic movie with a kick-ass soundtrack. Just search for You Could Be Mine by Guns N' Roses. You can thank me later. Bethesda went on to develop and publish The Terminator 2029 in 1992 and The Terminator Rampage in 1993, both first-person shooters. Terminator 2029 employed a then new concept, a first-person perspective looking down the barrel of a gun. Gameplay was restricted to 4 directions, with the turning action rotating the player by 90 degrees. Christopher Weaver, Bethesda's founder, stated that ID Software took that idea and implemented it better. I don't know if this is entirely accurate, but ideas are difficult to patent and are a very precious commodity in creative endeavors. Rampage is especially significant, as the game features 3D grid mazes that the player explores level by level in search of a Skynet computer core. Players must collect pieces of a plasma gun scattered across various dungeons, assemble the weapon, and use it to defeat the game's final boss. Arena offers much of the same gameplay and story, reusing these design ideas and the same game engine. If you watch Rampage's footage, the similarities are striking. The individuals heavily involved in Arena's design were all pen and paper role players, what are now called tabletop RPG players, influenced by Dungeons & Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade. They were also big fans of the Ultima Underworld video game series. Ted Peterson admits to being heavily inspired by a relatively obscure 1992 RPG called Legends of Valor, a first-person RPG set in a three-dimensional environment that took place in a single city called Mitteldorf. The initial concept behind Arena is encapsulated in its name. It was intended as an action game featuring a series of tournaments in arenas, where your character would have been a member of a team fighting for a title against other teams. A story was developed around an evil wizard named Jagar Tharn, whom you could only confront after reaching the final combat in the Imperial City. Between these tournaments, you could undertake side quests with a more role-playing focus. In September 1993, the discussion still revolved around arena fights, so the developers must have changed direction in just a few months. They presented gladiatorial combat as a means for the government to keep citizens busy, allowing them to blow off steam by attending these bloody events. Pretty much what it was in ancient Rome. According to this plan, one day the ruler would be dethroned, civil war would ensue, and it would be up to the player to restore order and reinstate the rightful ruler. Some of the screenshots provided to the magazine I'm referring to are quite interesting. They show early character development, an incomplete in-game UI with party members and buttons lacking icons, and even dragons attacking a tower. I guess some ideas are like university lectures. If you're not using one today, you'll reuse it someday in the future. They even considered incorporating a multiplayer aspect, playing with other people over the internet, but of course that wasn't possible at the time. They envisioned allowing players to manage their own gladiator team, hiring, dismissing, and negotiating with team members to build their group. However, this idea never advanced beyond the conceptual stage. Over time, side quests became more important than the tournaments, and eventually the original concept was scrapped in favor of a more role-playing experience centered on questing and dungeon delving. They ended up with a game that was radically different from what they had initially pitched, but the advertising and packaging were already in place, so the name stuck, Arena. They justified it by claiming that the Empire of Tamriel was so violent it could be called an arena, and they added the subtitle The Elder Scrolls somewhat arbitrarily, with an opening narration proclaiming, "It has been foretold in the Elder Scrolls." They had no plans regarding what it meant. Additionally, parts of Tamriel were taken from a homebrew setting created by several staff members for their own Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Some names were just thrown out there, like a province literally called Elsewhere. They missed the Christmas 1993 deadline and released the game in March 1994, a huge problem for a small developer and publisher. At that time, boxed video games were primarily sold in stores during the holidays. Distributors discovered that Bethesda had not developed the arena fighting game that they expected, which contributed to the meager initial sales of only about 3,000 copies. Many were convinced the company was about to go under, but eventually, sales began rising month by month through word of mouth, and Bethesda found themselves with a minor cult hit. I'll mention some of these details in the appropriate sections, but the development was so rushed that they ended up reusing many assets and writing fewer quests than wanted. They also had only a couple of beta testers, which meant the game shipped with quite a few bugs, arguably inaugurating a long Bethesda tradition. Later, patches were distributed to fix some issues, but at that time you couldn't download patches from the internet. You had to order them and receive them on physical media such as floppy disks. Todd Howard himself joined Bethesda as a beta tester for the CD-ROM edition of The Elder Scrolls Arena. As you probably know, he would later take on the roles of executive producer for Oblivion, lead designer for Skyrim, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, and ultimately game director for Starfield. Todd recalls that his first instinct was to run around as a murder hobo. Then he came across a river, found a boat, sailed to a small island where he discovered the crypt, killed some skeletons, and found a magic item. No quests sent him there. It was that kind of freedom in the game that hooked him. Arena was nothing short of an ambitious project, perhaps even too ambitious in scope for the technology and resources of its time. However, it certainly laid the groundwork for what The Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall would later refine and honestly overdo, and what would become a hallmark of Bethesda Softworks' influence in the RPG video game ecosystem. The Elder Scrolls Arena is free to play today. Although it's a 30-year-old game, making its original technical performance less relevant, I want to explain how it runs on modern machines. You can find it on most digital distribution services. I downloaded mine on Steam because I like to keep most of my games in one place. According to the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, the versions on both Steam and GOG are the CD-ROM final release, version 1.07. The good news is that the game comes with the DOSBox emulator, so you don't need to jump through many hoops to run it on a modern system. There is also a keymapper mod, available on Nexus Mods, that allows you to use the WASD keys instead of the game's original, now awkward controls. There are several versions of this mod. I ended up merging the latest version with the 2017 edition, so that the A and D keys handle strafing, while Q and E are used for turning. One side effect of using the keymapper is that it remaps your whole keyboard. This became a bit cumbersome when I had to answer one of the many dungeon's riddles. I had to save the game, exit, deactivate the keymapper by renaming its file, relaunch the game, answer the riddle, save again, exit the game again, and then reverse the process to reactivate the mod. I eventually renounced it. It's easier just to get used to the original controls from those times. In much of my footage, you'll notice a font different from the original because the original font was straining my eyes. That big pixelated cursive wasn't easy to read for me, and it matters when you spend many hours playing. However, some text remains in the original font, since those are static images rather than editable strings. Next, I suggest opening the arena.conf file and making the following changes. Under SDL, set the output value to OpenGL, this feels much better. Under render, set scaler to normal 3x, and under CPU, set cycles to 30,000. You can adjust between 25,000 and 31,000 for an improved experience. The game also lagged considerably. After a few hours of play, I discovered a solution. Although you might assume that the draw distance can be set to maximum on a modern machine, it's best not to. Instead, set it to about 1/3 of the maximum value for a smoother experience. You'll see buildings popping up in cities, but the dungeon experience will be much better. And in dungeons is where much of my time was spent. Last but not least, save very often. I really wished for a quick save function. The game crashed several times, or I was suddenly utterly destroyed by some enemies, and trust me, you don't want to lose half an hour or more of dungeon crawling. Character creation is fairly basic, reflecting this early 90s games direct inspiration from pen and paper RPGs. Initially, you can either select your class or have one generated for you by answering a series of questions, a feature that carries over into later titles such as Daggerfall and Morrowind. Vijay Lakshman, again apologies, mentioned in an interview that every answer to these questions is correct. However, each answer contributes to categories like logical, intelligent, or bold. For example, a knight might be scored as 90% bold, 10% logical, and not intelligent at all. Poor knight. While I'm not sure how realistic that breakdown is in game mechanics, it offers insight into how your answers ultimately determine your class. With each response, one of the three primarily base class constellations becomes brighter, until the game assigns you a final class. Although answering these questions enhances the role-playing experience, I suggest selecting your class directly if you want to tailor it to your playstyle. A quick look at the class section in the player guide and the Codex Scientia is recommended. The Codex Scientia, the official arena guide, which as I said was quite rare back in the day, but is now available as a PDF in the game folder, lists 18 classes divided into 3 microclasses: Warrior, Thief, and Mage. For instance, the Knight is considered a Warrior subclass, while the Spellsword falls under the Mage category. Every class has 2 primary attributes and 6 secondary ones. These aren't clearly explained in-game, so you'll need to refer to the manuals. The manuals also detail which weapons, armor, and shields your class can use, as well as starting hit points and any special abilities. For example, a rogue has a chance to critically strike opponents as their special ability, a chance that increases with each level. Classes also come with different starting equipment. A clear nod to traditional pen and paper RPGs. Pay attention to the type of armor your class can wear. In Arena, only plate armor is strong enough to be enchanted. An important note: as said before, the manuals clearly state that playing some classes makes the game easier than others. Choose wisely, but always prioritize your preferred playstyle. For instance, spending hours playing as a mage, although powerful, is not as enjoyable for me personally. After class selection, you'll enter your character's name and choose your province of origin. You can select any race except for those from the Imperial Province. The rationale appears to be that the Imperial Province is more multi-ethnic, while the other provinces maintain a distinct general populace, aside from their rulers, a topic for later. For now, enjoy the splendor of ancient Argonians or Khajiit who have not yet evolved into full catfolk. You may notice that orcs, or the Orsimer, as they are sometimes called, are not yet a playable race. This changes later in the series, with the introduction of the Kingdom of Orsinium in Daggerfall. Each race comes with specific bonuses. For example, Brethons takes half damage from magic-based attacks, and no damage at all on a successful saving throw. Even if it wasn't advised in the manuals, I chose my warrior to be a Breton so he could better withstand magical attacks. All these details are explained in both the game manual and the Codex Scientia. Again, in this era, it was expected that you'd read the manuals. Your race also influences how NPCs react to you, contributing to an empire filled with believable characters. I don't think there's a big difference in reactions, it's all just flavor, but it adds to the immersion. Additionally, race and gender affect starting statistics, so refer to the Codex Scientia if you want to optimize your character. Next, choose your character's face by cycling through the available options, though there aren't many. After that, the game randomly generates your attributes based on your race and class. All classes benefit greatly from 2 specific attributes, as explained in detail in the same guide. The game itself only offers a vague hint, such as thy body and mind must be strong and hardy if thou art to succeed as a warrior. So be sure to at least skim through the manuals. When distributing your attribute points, follow the guidelines. A score range of 45 to 55 is average and confers no bonuses. Scores below that are a penalty, and scores above that provide a bonus of +1 for every 5 points spent over 50, up to a maximum of +10 at 100. I learned this the hard way during my first playthrough, so refer to the manual and the codex for details on how attributes influence gameplay. Also, note that agility is crucial for any class, affecting your armor rating enemy hit chance, your chance to hit, and your proficiency in activities such as stealing or lockpicking. It's important to note that Arena does not include a formal skill system. Skills are introduced later in Daggerfall. Your ability to pick locks or steal is determined by your agility and intelligence scores, your level, and your class, with thieves and nightblades receiving bonuses. While thieving can earn you a lot of money when mastered, I found it rather tedious and not extremely useful overall. If you're unsatisfied with your initial attribute rolls, you can re-roll at the end of character creation to try for a more favorable outcome. The progression system is very straightforward. You gain experience by defeating monsters, and each subsequent level requires more experience points than the previous one. In fact, progressing past level 20 becomes a chore due to the extreme increase in required experience. The formula is as follows. Before level 10, each level's experience requirement is the previous level's amount multiplied by 1.875 rounded down. After level 10, the multiplier becomes 1.5. Every class has different experience thresholds, meaning some level up faster than others. Again, the exact numbers are detailed in the Codex Scientia. Note that the game does not display the experience needed for the next level, so if you don't consult the manuals, you'll be left in suspense. There is even a theory that the absence of a maximum level could eventually break the game by causing the experience variable to overflow, although I haven't tested this because it would take an absurd amount of time. In practice, advancing beyond level 20 or 21 is extremely challenging. When you level up, you receive 3 to 6 points, determined randomly, to spend on your attributes. A highly sought after artifact will grant you 50 additional points, but that's a topic for later. Finally, there are some hidden stats, the saving throws, which work much like in the early editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Instead of being d20 based, these saving throws range from 1 to 100 and are determined by your level and class. To halve the damage from a specific attack, your d100 roll must exceed a specific number. For example, a level 9 warrior must roll higher than 75 to halve the damage received from a firebolt. If you think about it and have a little bit of experience with them, all of this is very much in the spirit of traditional pen and paper RPGs. Exploration is one of the key defining elements of Arena. Todd Howard became completely absorbed by the procedurally generated elements just outside the very first dungeon. That said, this emphasis on automatically generated content is a double-edged sword, something I'm not a fan of. Personally, I prefer smaller, handcrafted zones in RPGs to vast, procedurally generated regions. I believe that a human touch adds to the experience, even though I understand that procedural generation was necessary to feasibly populate the entire continent of Tamriel. In a 1994 Computer Gaming World article, Arena was criticized for being so large that everything eventually feels mechanical and repetitive. I can't help but agree somewhat with that assessment. Arena combines both procedurally generated and handcrafted content. When you exit the first dungeon through the shift gate created by Real Silmain, you are transported to a random town in your home province. For instance, any settlement in Black Marsh if you're an Argonian. Excluding the Imperial Province, which consists solely of the Imperial City in this game, all 8 provinces include 8 city-states, 8 towns, and 16 villages each. In addition, every province contains 2 dungeons that are part of the main quest, and 14 additional dungeons that you can access by accepting various side quests. These side quest dungeons have fixed locations, although their names can vary depending on when you unlock them. It's a hard-to-believe time-based name generation. More dungeons can be found in the wilderness, appearing as towers, crypts, bandits' hideouts, and the like. I explored several of these to level up, and in the early stages the experience was quite enjoyable. The tile sets offer a decent amount of variation for that era, and the decor appropriately reflects the dungeon's designation. You'll encounter furniture, kitchens, barrels, sacks, implements of torture, and more. However, if you play a mundane class, expect some grinding before you can deal with the main quest locations, at which point the experience can start to feel repetitive. The wilderness itself is a whole different animal. The area surrounding a settlement is always a square block of 64 by 64 tiles, procedurally generated by selecting pseudo-randomly from 66 pre-generated tiles. Some tiles appear more frequently than others, as they are organized in lists. Interestingly, the seed for this pseudo-random generation is based on the first 4 letters of the settlement name. So for example, in Black Marsh, the settlements of Rock Grove, Rock Park, Rock Guard, Rock Point, and Rock Spring all share the same wilderness map. I'm not sure whether the developers overlooked this or simply ran out of time to fix it. Additionally, if you reach the boundary of any wilderness map, there is no indication of it. The game continues to generate the last 4 tiles endlessly, which may cause glitches. This design creates the impression of an endless wilderness and forces you to use the fast travel to reach other settlements, despite the game manual's claims. Due to its procedural nature, you cannot annotate your map while in the wilderness. However, in towns and cities, you can write directly on the map and take notes. The game will annotate important locations, inns, temples, guild entrances, if you examine their building, or even mark destinations when a friendly NPC provides directions. Typically, they first give you a general direction, and once you are close enough, they mark your destination on the city map. The game also implements a system that reinforces its fantasy life simulation aspect. When you're in a settlement or its immediate surroundings, you can ask the locals for directions, rumors, or work. You can inquire about specific shops, inns, temples, or even the nearest tavern for a room or gear repair. This is useful when you're searching for a specific service, such an inn for resting, or a quest asks you to deliver something to a specific location. The fact that NPCs will give you directions, as said, was a nice touch that made the settlements feel alive. Or at least at first. After dozens of randomly generated quests, it gets repetitive. You can also ask NPCs about their identities, which is more for immersion than practicality, since they typically provide a random name and occupation. After the first few, you'll likely lose interest. Asking about rumors, though, can sometimes lead to quests. I'll go into more detail about quests and their types later. Settlements in different provinces have distinct assets and inhabitants. For example, you might visit the snowy town of Winterhold, a city in Morrowind with a volcano on the horizon, or a lush green settlement in Valenwood. Within these settlements, you will find 5 special types of NPCs offering various services: the bartender, the priest, the blacksmith, the mage, and the local lord or lady in their palace. It is unclear whether settlements are entirely procedurally generated, apart from the main quest locations. While shops' inventories are fixed, the names of equipment stores are not. The fact that you can annotate their maps makes me think that their general outline is fixed, while some elements in them are pseudo-randomly generated. So it's probably a mix of the two. In inns, you can buy drinks and even get drunk, which may lead to poisoning, or rent a room to sleep in, or even sneak into one if you're inclined toward thievery. You can also ask the bartender about rumors that might lead to quests. Different types of rooms have varying prices and recuperation speeds, though this isn't a particularly impactful mechanic. In my experience, any room would suffice, and you'll most likely wake up in a completely different room asking yourself how much did you drink last night. Note that inns are the only method of resting in settlements. In cities, monsters roam freely at night and pose a significant danger early in the game. While you can camp in the wilderness just outside the city gates, you are likely to be ambushed. At the beginning of the game, just after passing through the shift gate, you may find yourself in a settlement at night, and that's tough luck. Maybe you're even diseased and wounded after the first dungeon. You don't know where the nearest temple or inn is, and there's no one around to ask. You may genuinely find yourself soft-locked, killed by night monsters or by disease before you can find help. In inns, there is a list of drinks you can purchase. Drinking increases your strength, willpower, endurance, and luck, but at the cost of reducing intelligence, agility, speed, and personality. If any stat drops to 0, your character dies, and since the effects of alcohol vanish after resting or fast traveling, its practical benefits are somewhat questionable. Perhaps useful only in the very last dungeon of the Imperial City, and that's a stretch. I can't think of a reason why you would ever want your agility reduced. Overall, it feels more like an immersive role-playing element than a truly useful mechanic. Temples can heal your wounds or ailments in exchange for a donation, and they can also bless you with a temporary bonus to your attack power, although these bonuses also vanish with fast travel. Some players have reported that blessings seem bugged, but I can personally confirm that since I very rarely relied on them. Shops sell equipment made from various materials and repair your gear. If you're searching for higher tier items, like ebony weapons or armor, consult the UESP site. site. The shop inventories are fixed and are all listed on the site. You can also attempt to steal from them. If you fail, guards will appear. However, if you exit and re-enter the shop, your misdeed is forgotten, as Arena lacks a reputation or crime system like later entries in the series. A special kind of shop is the Mages Guild. Even if the manuals mention other guilds, such as the Thieves Guild, the Blades, or the Dark Brotherhood, these are not implemented in Arena. The Mages Guild is the only guild available, and it plays an important role. Its buildings allow you to buy magic gear and potions, identify looted magic items, and even purchase stock spells or craft custom ones through the Spellmaker if you are a magic user. You can also steal the reprised magic items using the same mechanic as in other shops. Potions are essential, especially if you play a non-magic character, but that's safe for everyone. Never venture into a dungeon without a good supply of healing potions, restore power potions if you're a spellcaster, and potions to cure disease, poison, and grant freedom of movement. Some monsters will paralyze you, and freedom of movement potions will save you from the slaughter. It may seem counterintuitive to chug a potion while you're paralyzed, but the manuals explain that's not a complete paralysis. You can move enough to drink a remedy. Weird. Additionally, various elemental resistance potions are very useful since many monsters deal elemental magic damage. It bears repeating. Always stock up before adventuring. I liked this part because it feels like you're preparing before undertaking a dangerous endeavor, just as a true adventurer should. The Spellmaker lets you craft your own spells. According to online sources, it's possible to create overpowered spells, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm not much of a magic user, so I only dabble with it. In the Spellmaker, you assign a name to your spell, select its target type, combine up to 3 magical effects, choose the required saving throw, and the system calculates both the cost and the spell points needed to cast it. The palace, always located on the city walls, is home to the nobility. Here, you can receive noble quests, which are more dangerous and rewarding missions that I'll cover later. An important detail about the game's setting is its calendar. Tamriel has its own calendar, as explained in the manuals. A year consists of 360 days divided into 12 months of about 30 days each, similar to our Gregorian calendar. Although there are some discrepancies between the in-game calendar and the printed manuals, the key point in Arena is that certain festivities trigger special events. For example, on the 7th of First Seed, known as the First Planting, clerics at temples offer free clinics throughout the day. Other festivities may result in discounts at shops, free drinks at taverns, and so on. While these events didn't significantly impact my gameplay, they added to the overall immersion by making the world feel alive. As a side note, if you're interested in these details, Tamriel's dates are recorded by listing the era first, followed by the current year. There are 5 eras in the series, each lasting between 800 and 1000 years. Arena is set in the 3rd era, year 389. Canonically, your character, the Eternal Champion, will take 10 years to finally defeat Jaegard Tharn. That's plenty of time to get good and gather equipment. Chances are your run will take less time than that. Dungeon delving is a major part of Arena's gameplay loop. You will explore 18 main quest dungeons, and many more if you choose to roam freely. The main dungeons are handcrafted and expensive, with fully annotated maps available in the Codex Scientia that detail monster spawns, loot locations, and more. In these dungeons, the game provides written descriptions of specific rooms or areas to enhance immersion. However, some dungeons can be particularly challenging to navigate. Labyrinthian, for instance, because of its chaotic design, and Mirkwood, due to its limited visibility. Some require swimming or exploring underground tunnels and shafts to reach your quest objectives. You may need to jump over chasms or lava pools. Note that your jumping ability is influenced by your strength and speed, making it easy to overshoot and fall into a lava pool. While you can explore every nook and cranny for experience and loot, some dungeons aren't meant to be fully explored. Also, keep in mind that your inventory is limited to 40 items, so you cannot collect every valuable object. Even if you restrict yourself to picking up only magical items, recommended because of the slot to value ratio, you won't be able to carry a lot. For a loot hoarder like me, it's painful. If you exit the dungeon and later return, the monster spawns and treasures will have reset. You can grind in some of the earlier dungeons by exploiting this mechanic, but the later main dungeons generally offer little loot and are not worth repeated runs. Wilderness dungeons tend to be smaller and, although they offer some variety, they eventually become repetitive. I found them interesting and useful for early exploration, loot, and experience, but as you progress in the main story, their usefulness diminishes. While exploring dungeons, you will encounter locked doors and chests. You can attempt to pick locks if your character has high agility, or simply bash them open. Note that using brute force may damage your weapon, so it's wise to have a spare. You can use your bare hands, but it will damage your health. The manual warns that breaking a chest's lock might damage its contents, but I haven't observed this effect myself. You will also encounter many riddles, something I wasn't fond of. Sometimes, a wrong answer has no consequence, other times it triggers a monster ambush. The Codex Scientia and various online resources provide all the answers you need if you prefer not to guess. There is also an especially annoying bug in dungeons. When you're crawling or swimming in a tunnel, if there is a monster on the floor above you, the game blocks that square, preventing progress, even if the monster isn't directly in front of you. This issue has never been fixed. During exploration, you'll need to cycle through different mouse cursor modes, a mechanic that may seem odd to new players. The cursor, an X, behaves differently depending on whether you are in normal, steel, or cast mode. For example, placing the cursor on a locked door in normal mode displays your assessment of the lock, while doing so in steel mode lets you attempt to pick it. When exploring, you must also rest to replenish your health, stamina, and spell points. To do so, find an elevated platform or a bed, which reduces the likelihood of monsters wandering nearby. Unfortunately, some dungeons have very few resting spots, so it's advisable to carry plenty of potions as a more reliable means of recovery. In my experience, loot in dungeons is somewhat unbalanced. Aside from a bug that may cause loot piles to spawn repeatedly in the same place, overall, there is little loot. Potions and magic items are expensive, and the monetary rewards from loot or monsters drops are minimal, often forcing a grind. Whether this was by design to encourage more exploration and questing, or simply a flaw, it's not an aspect of the game I particularly enjoyed. Now, behold combat. You might be thinking that combat hasn't changed much throughout the Elder Scrolls series, and you might be right. In Arena, melee weapons require you to right-click and drag the mouse across the screen. Different directions produce different types of attacks, each with its own modifiers. There is an entire formula to calculate your hit chance, determine where you strike, and compute your critical hit chance. Honestly though, it doesn't matter. You just need to flail your weapon like crazy. Ranged combat is straightforward. Simply fire your bow at the enemy's general direction. Sometimes you'll hit monsters at some unexpected angle. You don't need to worry about ammunition, but your bow will degrade over time and eventually break, simulating the need for arrows. Magic combat, on the other hand, feels clunky. Perhaps it's partly a skill issue on my part, as I'm not a huge fan of playing magic users, but you must click on the sunburst icon, choose the spell from a list, and then click on the enemy to cast it. You can recall the last spell cast, but the process still feels cumbersome. Spells might be powerful though, and their durations are mentioned in rounds, with one round equaling 5 seconds. Spells are divided into 8 circles based on power, even if circles is not the precise term used, but they function much like the spell levels in D&D. Some monsters take extra damage from weapons made of specific materials. For example, nearly all undead take double damage from silver, while other foes require high-tier materials just to chip away at them. Mithril is the lowest common denominator for damaging a wide range of monsters, including leeches. Trolls or vampires require additional magic or fire damage because they regenerate, and only those types of damage will kill them permanently. Or you might just run away when they are incapacitated. However, you're unlikely to gain experience from them. If you crave numbers, the Codex Scientia provides monster stats and excellent advice on how to fight them. If you run out of hit points, the green bar, you die. Your stamina bar, red, depletes as you walk, fight, and especially swim. I suppose game designers were not good swimmers. The blue bar represents spell points, they weren't called magic yet, and as a spellcaster, you'll drain them quickly, which means you must rest frequently. All these bars are refilled by resting or camping, but as I mentioned, this isn't always feasible in dungeons. Therefore, your character really needs to sport a potions bandolier, complete with healing, stamina, and restore power potions. Since these potions cost money, you'll need to grind for cash. slash. Besides taking damage, you might contract diseases from monsters. Rats, ghouls, and similar foes can infect you with the plague. The Codex Scientia contains a detailed table of diseases and their sources, but it doesn't matter. As soon as your character portrait background turns yellow, drink a cure disease potion immediately. Also, avoid getting paralyzed while swimming or you drown. Your character's portrait background will display various conditions. Yellow for disease, green for poison, red when health is critically low, around 10%, blue when under a spell effect, and aqua when healthy. Usability didn't look to be top priority back then, so good luck distinguishing between blue and aqua. None of this detracts from the old school experience of being healed without knowing why. It happens a lot, especially against monsters that cast spells like machine guns. The equipment here are quite basic. You have 7 body parts to protect with different armor pieces such as helms, boots, and so on. The armor types are limited to leather, chain, and plate, each subsequent type offering more protection. Remember, classes have limitations of the type of armor they can wear, and only plate armor is strong enough to be enchanted. In addition, the material of weapons and armor affects both the damage you inflict and the protection you receive. Some monsters, as mentioned earlier, are nearly invulnerable to lower tier materials. Once you have enough money, hunt for ebony gear, which is the highest tier available. The stores that sell these items are listed in the USP site. Your equipment also has a condition status. You can check it by right-clicking the item in your inventory. In my experience, only weapons, artifacts, or magic items with charges show degradation. There aren't real charges, those items just degrade with activation. Also, I never had to repair armor, except for shields. Any blacksmith shop will repair these items, even if they're broken, for 10% of their value over 10 days. You can barter to lower the price, but it will require more days, or having faster repairs cost more. I tried it a couple of times, then I stopped bothering with bartering for repairs entirely. Remember that you don't want to break your weapon in the middle of a dungeon, so bring spares. At the end of the day, as in most RPGs, you can make your life easier by throwing bags of money at your enemies. As the saying goes, money can't buy happiness, but it can certainly solve a lot of problems. So, subscribe to the channel, farm dungeons, loot only the magic items, get them identified at 10% of the value at the Mages Guild, and resell what you don't need. That's the circle of prosperity in Arena. The main story of Arena is very bare bones, closely recalling that of Terminator Rampage. Originally, as said in the development section, developers were working on an action game centered around arena fights. In various interviews, Ted Peterson, one of Arena's designers, explained how he began creating side quests. Most of the gameplay was initially intended to take place in arenas, with extra gold and experience earned by completing missions for various city inhabitants. These quests remain the game and are generated according to a specific pattern, which I'll explain shortly. During playtesting, the team discovered that arena combat wasn't popular, but players loved the side quests. As a result, they reoriented the game to focus on these missions, so the arenas disappeared, replaced by legendary dungeons scattered throughout the Empire of Tamriel. About the main story, the game gives you a very succinct prologue that immediately throws you into gameplay. However, the player guide contains a very well-written narrative introduction that explains, in a novel-like style, how your character becomes involved in the conflict. You play as a minor personality at the Emperor's court, canonically, I assume, named Tallinn. Uriel Septim VII has been betrayed by his court mage, Jegar Tharn. The wizard invited the Emperor to discuss rumors of treachery, and when the ruler and General Warhaft showed up, the real betrayal unfolded. Jegar Tharn used the Staff of Chaos to imprison both the Emperor and the General in oblivion. Because the Emperor cannot be killed, thanks to the Amulet of Kings, an artifact we'll learn more about in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, the mage imprisoned him in another plane and assumed his guise. All his loyal guards were trapped as well, and Jegar Tharn even transformed his own loyal servants to replace them. Ria Silmain, the court mage's apprentice, discovered what had happened and tried to alert the Elder Council, but the wizard killed her. He also threw you into the Imperial Dungeon. Perhaps due to your low status, they neither killed nor searched you, they simply left you there to die. With his plan nearing completion, Jegar Tharn drained the Staff of Chaos of its power and infused it into the Jewel of Fire along with his life force. Essentially, the wizard became a sort of a leech, with the jewel serving as his phylactery. Because the staff is made from the very essence of the land, it cannot be destroyed. Instead, Jegar Tharn divided into 8 pieces pieces and hid them throughout the Empire. You awaken in the dungeon as a prisoner, inaugurating another long-running Elder Scrolls tradition. Rhea Silmain appears to you in spirit form. Using her mystical abilities, she contacts and guides you. She creates a key that unlocks your cell door and gives you instructions on how to escape. You follow her guidance, find the shift gate she created, and are teleported to your home province. There, you begin your training and your quest to get good enough to locate the 8 pieces of the Staff of Chaos. Until the staff is reassembled, you cannot defeat or expose Jaeger Thorn, nor can you free the Emperor from Oblivion. The main storyline revolves around the dungeons where the staff's pieces are hidden. In each new province, guided by Real Silmain's spirit, you inquire about a dungeon, seek out someone knowledgeable on the subject, and perform a favor to that NPC in exchange for the dungeon's location. For each piece of the staff, you typically explore 2 dungeons. The first to retrieve a special object for the NPC, and the second to find the staff piece itself. Although the process is somewhat repetitive, each legendary dungeon has its own unique vibe. You'll also visit locations that later installments explore in greater detail, places like Winterhold, Labyrinthian, and even Dagoth Ur. Some players lament that it's difficult to survive even the first dungeon, known as the Imperial Dungeons. Essentially a sewer system infested with giant rats and goblins, it can be a challenge for a level 1 character. Arena offers no tutorial, but the first dungeon introduces all the essential elements: channels, resting platforms, loot piles, enemies, and secret doors, which are always conveniently marked on your map. The game expects you to learn on your own. I can hardly imagine how a challenging experience right out of the gate could help sales, but Real Silmain advises you not to linger in the prison, just escape. If you're a bit of a completionist like me, however, you might be tempted to explore every corner. The main quest eventually sends you to 18 large dungeons. I already said that you can reset these dungeons by exiting and re-entering them to farm experience and loot. While the early dungeons can be exploited in this way, the later ones are so vast, intricate, and sometimes so difficult to navigate that they're likely not intended to be fully explored. The last ones also offer little loot, so a better strategy is simply to complete the objectives and move on. Eventually, you will gather the 8 pieces of the staff and head to the Imperial City to confront Jaeger Thorn.
I have watched as you blundered your way to this place. At one time, I even considered approaching you with an offer to lead my Imperial Guards, but it is plain that you are not worthy of such a position. Be not fooled by what you would call success in your journey across the Empire, for you have never faced a being as powerful as I. Your death shall be slow and torturous, a suffering that shall span the millennium. Come, I await you in the dungeons below.
The final dungeon is extremely challenging, with high-tier enemies attacking you relentlessly. However, you can cheese the final boss fight. Simply ignore him, grab a key, touch the Jewel of Fire, and congratulations, you won the game and free the Emperor.
You must not! The jewel holds my life force! Thou art truly a child of the Empire. I thank thee for thy assistance. I have a particular idea as to the question of your service in mind. From this day forth, thou art named the Eternal Champion. From thy hand shall be dealt the needs of the Empire. I, Uriel Septim, true Emperor of Tamriel, do decree and thus make law. Arise, my champion, and take thy rightful place at my side.
Take what you will from this storyline. It's pretty basic and arguably not the game's strongest aspect. Some critics argue that the main quest is never the strongest aspect of a Bethesda game. I'd point out that Daggerfall has a much more elaborate storyline, but that's a subject for another video. Outside the main quest, you have randomly generated side quests. There are 3 types: in-quest, Palace quests, and artifact quests. The first 2 are time sensitive. The in-quests are the most trivial, obtained by asking bartenders for work. They typically involve delivering or retrieving an item or escorting someone somewhere. They're good for earning some money early on, but they're not paid that well and have very little variety. Palace quests are evolved from the in-quests. These offer more time-consuming yet better paid challenges. There is a 5% chance per character level to receive one from a local ruler. They still offer delivery, retrieval, or escort tasks, but add rescuing a person, capturing a criminal, or slaying a creature as new mission types. They often require you to travel to another settlement. Because they take place in dungeons and are randomly generated, they can sometimes be buggy or frustrating. For example, receiving conflicting directions or inadequate time to complete the mission. Once, a ruler sent me in the complete opposite direction I needed to go to complete a wrong task. Another time, I've been sent to free a relative from the bottom of a dungeon, only to find myself facing a lich I was too underleveled for. Artifact quests are a different animal. There are 16 artifact quests, and while not all character classes can use every artifact, the game is supposed to avoid offering new artifacts you can't equip, though I'm not 100% sure this always works. Lore-wise, it's nice to see artifacts that appear in later Elder Scrolls titles. These quests typically begin in inns by talking to a bartender, or you might learn about them by asking locals for rumors. The quest will name the artifact and direct you to a specific inn where an NPC sells information about its location for a fee. This NPC then sends you to a dungeon in another province, where you'll find a treasure map that points to the artifact's dungeon. Similar to the main quest, you must explore 2 dungeons. The first to gather a key object for the NPC, and the second where the artifact is located on the final floor in an unlocked chest. The chance of receiving an artifact quest is 1% per character level, capped at 15%. You can only possess 1 artifact at a time, though you can work around this by giving an artifact to a blacksmith for repairs. It will then disappear from your inventory and the game won't register it. Which artifact you want depends on your character class and playstyle. Refer to guides or wikis for details. For example, the Ogma Infinium grants 50 extra attribute points, making it very useful for everyone. Let's close this chapter with one final note about quest management. Your logbook displays only 16 missions at a time. When a new quest is added, the oldest entry is erased. The manual suggests printing out your logbook to avoid losing track, but honestly, it's best not to take on too many quests at once. Talking about the visuals for an old game begs the question: does it really make sense to comment on the graphics? In 1994, Arena's graphics were praised, but today they are more challenging to appreciate. Tamriel has always embodied a generic high fantasy, from Arena to Skyrim. What stands out in Arena is an attention to detail. If you look around and pay attention, you'll notice subtle elements. Even stuff that just seems to be thrown out there in this game actually has greater significance in later entries of the series. You will also find more mundane elements that are visually quite interesting, showing attention to detail. However, they are repeated over and over by the procedural generation, eventually losing their impact and blending into the background. This game is an old-school, pixelated fest. At the time, reviewers lauded its graphics, drawing comparisons to Ultima 4, Ultima Underworld, and Wasteland, calling them in-depth and sophisticated. The graphics were very demanding for PCs of the 90s, likely because Arena did not overly restrict the player's camera with a heavy user interface, as many other games did. Although there are buttons and other elements along the bottom of the screen, many first-person dungeon scrollers of that era limited the view even further in order to ease the CPU's workload. Dedicated GPUs were not yet common. While exploring the world, you may notice visual differences between the various provinces, whether in the weather, the skybox, or the architecture of settlements. Unfortunately, the sheer number of these settlements in each province can dilute these differences, making many locations feel repetitive. It's also worth noting that Bethesda used real-life scale models for some cities and landscapes, which were then rebuilt in the game engine. Outside of the architecture and weather, the common populace shows some variation in clothing and skin color, but not much. Sure, you might find people wearing mantles, hoods, and furs in Skyrim, while in Hammerfell they wear barely anything. But you encounter so many of them that this variety seems very small. Due to time constraints, Bethesda also had to recycle many assets, leading to amusing situations, such as a white human lord governing a province like Hammerfell or Valenwood, and the same blacksmith or innkeeper appearing in every shop and inn. Priests, mages, and building interiors received similar treatment. There are a few variations on the general theme, but eventually you will always enter the same 2 or 3 shops, temples, mages guilds, residences, or palace interiors. The same can be said for the procedurally generated dungeons, where you end up revisiting similar maps repeatedly. I initially thought my perspective was influenced by a modern point of view, but a 1994 article noted the same issue when the game was released, radically changing the game design just a few months before release, likely contributed to the problem by leaving less time to develop new assets. But my main argument is that procedural generation does not work as a valid technique for populating a huge world. It's intriguing at first, but after seeing a few assets variations, the land feels essentially empty. I don't think my view on this will be any different for Daggerfall and Starfield. A small yet frustrating detail is that in the main quest dungeons, you often have to find keys to open doors. You can't always use the password spell to bypass them, and this is fine gameplay-wise for a dungeon crawler. But some keys are very difficult to spot against their pedestal or floor texture. The problem is made worse by the fact that the dungeons are usually very dark, and in Arena you cannot carry torches. Instead, you must rely on casting the light spell, or using magic items, to illuminate your surroundings, placing another obstacle in front of mundane classes. In the footage I'm using for this video, you'll notice different fonts in the game's UI. As mentioned earlier, I eventually changed the font through a mod because the original, hugely pixelated cursive style was straining my eyes after long hours of playing this game. I know I already said it, I don't mean to repeat myself, but this pertains to the visual section. One last funny mention, the game box. The main cover art clearly depicts an original gladiator team of 4 characters, a relic from an earlier version of the game before the entire design was overhauled. As said before, by the time Bethesda changed direction, the marketing and the artwork were already finalized. Notably, the cover also features a female character wearing, let's say, very little clothing, clearly an attempt to appeal to the nerdy demographic of the time. Today, something like this would be unthinkable, for better or worse. I leave that for others to decide. The music in Arena is generally good, composed by Eric Halberling, and he contributes significantly to the game's immersion. One drawback is that many of the tracks are short and tend to loop repeatedly. The background music changes according to various factors such as time of day, location, weather, season, and even the game version. Some refer to it as chiptune music, highlighting its electronic character, and the fact that it was created using programmable sound generator chips or synthesizers. These tracks rely on basic, small samples that older computers or console could produce, as sound cards were not very powerful at the time. Despite these limitations, the tracks remain appealing even today. The main theme is particularly notable, fitting perfectly with the high fantasy setting that Arena aims to evoke. In fact, it is even rearranged and featured in shops throughout the game. Together with other pieces, the soundtrack enhances the immersion, especially in eerie, dark underground areas. When combined with ambient sounds, such as the echo of heavy footsteps, the splashes during swimming or paddling, and the groans or shrieks of nearby monsters, the overall audio experience is highly immersive. However, there are a few missteps. For example, I found the tavern track rather annoying. It simply got under my skin. Additionally, some issues with the sound implementation are noticeable. In dungeons, monster sounds sometimes play even when no enemy is nearby, creating confusion. There are also instances where the game triggers loud, unsettling sounds without any clear reason, leaving you to wonder if something significant has occurred. Unfortunately, these inconsistencies can break the immersion. Obviously, there is very little voice acting in Arena. I believe it is only present in the CD-ROM version, and I couldn't find any credits for it. Ted Peterson mentioned that much, maybe even all, of the voiceover work was done by the developers themselves. Rhea Silmain was voiced by programmer Jennifer Pratt.
Do not fear, for it is I, Rhea Silmain. Listen to me. There are no others left to carry on your fight. You have been left in this cell to die.
Let's wrap this video up. I didn't want this retrospective to go on forever or turn into a monstrous multi-hour video. Yet I still wanted to highlight features and anecdotes I found interesting. Nonetheless, it was a big endeavor I hope you'll appreciate. The Elder Scrolls Arena is the first installment of the series and I wanted to start from the beginning. Although I'm familiar with the latest titles, this was my first time playing Arena. It requires a bit of patience, especially with the controls, and a genuine love for retro gaming. I understand it's not for everyone, but if you're interested in the series, I suggest giving it a try. It's free, easy to install and run, and enjoyable in its own unique way. I don't claim to be an expert on the Elder Scrolls lore. I only consider myself familiar with some parts of it. I was particularly interested in experiencing a piece of early Bethesda history and revisiting locations that appear in other games. Playing Arena provided incredible insight into many features that Bethesda later incorporated and, at times, faced criticism for in other games. If you're even a little like me, I recommend doing at least one run of this game. Try the Spellsword class, which is notoriously beginner-friendly because it grants access to both melee combat and spells. Experience some of the procedurally generated content, such as early quests and wilderness dungeons, and then head straight for the main quest. Make abundant use of guides and the USP site. They'll help carry you through the end. There isn't a modern remake of Arena like Daggerfall Unity. There is a project called OpenTES Arena, an engine rewrite in C++, but at the time of this video it is still far from finished. Arena was an incredibly ambitious project. Some design choices are bold or even crazy, and while not all of them add to the overall experience, they were implemented because they fit the developer's vision. If you want to dig deeper, check out the sources linked in the video description. I tried my best to stick to the facts and avoid wild assumptions, but at the end of the day I'm only human. I might have misread an article or zoned out during a 3-hour YouTube interview. If you notice any errors, please let me know in the comments. I'll happily pin a post with the corrections. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like, comment and subscribe. All that YouTube stuff helps me reach more gamers out there. Take care and I'll see you in the next video.